Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of ICMDA webinars. I'm Dr. Peter Saunders, the Chief Executive of the International Christian Medical and Dental Association, ICMDA, which brings together around 60,000 Christian doctors and dentists from around the world in 80 national organizations. So it's my great pleasure today to introduce Dr. Christina Francis, who is a board-certified OBGYN and also the CEO-elect of APLOG, the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists. And she's going to speak to us and lead us on discussion about how to defend life in the womb using logic and reason winsomely and graciously, along with powerful medical and scientific evidence. It's far more important than ever before that we're able to defend our patients, both born and preborn, from the travesty of abortion. And this talk's going to give you the tools to be able to do that much more effectively. Dr. Francis is a board-certified OBGYN, and she currently works as an OBGYN hospitalist. I think that's American jargon for working in a hospital. Was new to me. She studied medicine at Indiana University in 2005 and completed her OBGYN residency at St. Vincent Hospital in Indianapolis in 2009. She's a board member and CEO-elect, as I mentioned, of APLOG. She's an associate scholar with the Charlotte Lozier Institute, a board member of Indiana Right to Life, a physician member of the Abortion Pill Reversal Network as well, and as a pro-life speaker, she offers her medical expertise, her knowledge of bioethics, and pro-life reasoning around the globe. She's worked for 3 years as the only OBGYN at a mission hospital in rural Kenya, so she brings a global South perspective as well to this issue. She's got a passion for human rights. She works tirelessly on behalf of women and children who are often victims of the abortion industry, and she's written widely on issues surrounding women's health and abortion for publications including the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, and USA Today. So, Dr. Christina, it's a pleasure to have you on ICMDA webinars. Thank you for giving us your time, and we really look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's great to be with everybody. Again, it's a real pleasure to be with all of you today. And I was so amazed to hear how many countries are going to be represented by the people watching this. So thank you for joining for what I think is a very, very important topic. As Peter said, now more than ever before, this is a topic of discussion, not just here in the US, but around the world. And I know many of you are probably working in countries that are facing immense pressure if your country hasn't already legalized abortion to do so. And so I'm hoping to be able to equip you not only to have, the right words to say to patients who may come into your office or who may come to see you, but also to have a good, winsome discussion with your colleagues. I know that we live in a pretty contentious world right now where it seems, at least here in the US, it seems to me that people have sort of lost the ability to have civil conversations with one another about things that they might disagree about. And so I'm hopeful that this will help equip you with the tools that you need to be able to have those winsome and gracious conversations. As Peter said, I'm an OBGYN. I live in Indiana currently, but worked for 3 years in Kapsawar, Kenya. I started with the Samaritan's Purse post-residency program and then stayed on longer and thought that that's what I would be doing with the rest of my life. So I am truly a kindred spirit with all of you. I only came back to the US to do what I'm doing now. So grateful to be able to be doing this, but definitely missing being in Kenya. So maybe we'll have someone from Kenya on here, hopefully. So I grew up in a pro-life household. I grew up as a Christian, and it was just kind of assumed that we were pro-life. My mom works for a pro-life organization. So for a long time, I called myself pro-life, but I don't know that I really had the tools to defend that position if I was really, truly challenged on it. And so I'm hoping that today, again, that I can give you some of those tools to be able to to defend the pro-life position, and not just with a religious background, but with a logic and reason-based background. So I think in order to discuss why we are against abortion, we need to understand the true extent of the issue. So if we look at abortion worldwide, it is actually the leading cause of death worldwide. If you compare that to what the WHO states is the leading cause of death worldwide, which is cardiovascular disease, that ends the lives of about 9 million people per year across the globe. And you can see there the magnitude of the number of lives lost every year through abortion, which is about 73 million abortions per year per the Guttmacher Institute. Of course, these are estimates because not everybody is reporting their abortion numbers, but you can see this is exponentially higher than what the WHO lists as the leading cause of death. And as I was looking to update my numbers before I made this presentation, what I saw was the current population of Kenya, and of course, that's in my head because that's where I lived, right now is about 57 million people. So this is greater than the entire population of Kenya, lives that are lost every year through the travesty of abortion. And that amounts to about 1 abortion every 2 seconds. So this is a significant issue, regardless of where you live, regardless of where you work. You are seeing women who are having abortions. I know you probably have even women within your churches who have had abortions. I mean, this is something that really touches everybody. It's something that everybody, especially all Christians, should be concerned about. You know, I would argue there's a lot of issues that we face in our world today, a lot of injustices, and, you know, so many that I haven't even become aware of, I'm sure. But I would argue that abortion really is the most important issue of injustice that we're facing, because all of our other rights really are predicated on our right to life. And, you know, this discussion of rights is often brought up in the discussion around abortion. And often we hear it in reference to women's rights, you know, rights to control their own body, things like that. I think that this discussion of rights is often brought up as a way to try to shut down discussion. Well, it's just my right, so you can't say anything about it. But I think when we are trying to understand this rights language, we need to understand that there are different kinds of rights that we're talking about. So let's talk about those 2 different types of rights. The first would be natural rights. So these are rights that are given to all human beings just because they exist. So these are our endowed rights. These rights are grounded in our human nature. And we're going to talk in just a little bit about when that human nature comes into existence. So basically, the moment our human nature comes into existence, we are in possession of these natural rights. No government grants these kind of rights. These are given to us by God. Through the essence of our human nature, we're given these natural rights. But governments rather should exist to protect these natural rights. So they can't give them, they can't take them away. The government is simply there to protect them. So what would be some examples of natural rights? Well, the right not to be harmed without adequate justification, that would be a natural right. I would consider the right to life a natural right. The right not to be convicted without a fair trial. Most people would consider that a natural right. We compare this then to legal rights, which is often what people are talking about when they say, this is my right, you can't take it away, or you can't say anything about it because I have a right to this. Legal rights are only acquired through a few things, either accomplishments, maturity, so you reach a certain age and then you have these rights, or other mutable or changeable characteristics. These kinds of rights do originate from the government. And because they originate from the government, they can be removed by the government. And these kinds of rights can only exist if our natural rights are protected. So our natural rights have to come first, and then we can be granted legal rights after that. So what are some examples of legal rights? Well, the right to vote, that's granted by the government, and depending on where you live, you obtain that right at a different age. The right to own property, again, that's given by the government, can be taken away. And these legal rights vary depending on what country you live in. However, natural rights should not vary depending on where you live. Again, they're grounded in our human nature. And so all of us, regardless of where we're born, regardless of the circumstances under which we are conceived or born, should share these natural rights. So where does abortion then fall in this discussion of rights? So I want to read you a quote from a professor, Hadley Arcus. He's a constitutional scholar here in the US. And he said this, speaking about unborn human beings: "No one would suggest that a fetus could have a claim to fill the chair of logic at one of our universities, and we would not wish quite yet to seek its advice on anything important. And we should probably not regard him as eligible to exercise the vote. All of these rights or privileges would be inappropriate to the condition or attributes of the fetus. But nothing that renders him unqualified for these special rights would diminish in any way the most elementary right that could be claimed for any human being, or even for an animal: the right not to be injured or killed without the rendering of reasons that satisfy the strict standards of a justification." And so you can see that abortion has become confused with a natural right, when in fact, in some places, it is a legal right. Abortion actually goes against the most fundamental of our natural rights. And so if our natural rights are based on our human nature, and that right to life is based on our human nature, then how does that ultimately impact the issue of abortion? Well, I think many people see this discussion around abortion as a very complex discussion. And so if you're like me, or how I was a few years ago, you sort of want to avoid those tough discussions because it can become very complex, very full of emotion. However, I want to challenge you to simplify the argument down, simplify it to what it really centers around. And we can do that by using a simple syllogism. And here's that syllogism. So the first statement in our syllogism is that abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human being. All right, this is the sole intent of an abortion, is to end the life of a developing human being. The second part of the syllogism is it is wrong to kill an innocent human being. I think most people would actually agree with that statement, right? So even if you're talking to somebody who is very much in support of a woman's right to choose to have an abortion, they likely would agree with you that it's wrong to kill an innocent human being. So that's a point of agreement that we can start from. So if the first statement is true and the second statement is true, then the third must be true. Therefore, abortion is wrong. So you see, to simplify the argument, what we need to do when we're talking with someone is help them to understand why those first two statements are true. And then they have to come to the logical conclusion that abortion is wrong. All right, so let's break this down by each of the first two statements. The first one, abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human being. So we need to understand, what is it that's being ended in an abortion? What are the unborn? This is one of my favorite quotes. Many of you probably have heard of Greg Koukl. Maybe you've read his book, Tactics, which is about Christian apologetics. He's also a wonderful pro-life apologist. And he said this, and I think this is just one of the most clarifying statements I've ever heard about abortion. He said, if the unborn are not human, then no justification for elective abortion is necessary. But if the unborn are human, then no justification for elective abortion is adequate. You see, this is the central question in the abortion debate, not the circumstances that the woman finds herself in when she becomes pregnant, not the condition of the unborn child, whether they have a disability, not the conditions into which he or she will be born. It's not these issues it's not that these aren't important discussions to have. They are, and we can't ignore them. And I think that the pro-life movement does that too often. They just ignore these sort of social circumstances and the circumstances in which a woman finds herself. These are important discussions, but they don't determine whether or not abortion is justified. And why is that? Well, again, let's talk about what unborn children are, because that's going to help clarify this discussion. What are the unborn? From the earliest stages of development, the unborn are three things. They're distinct, living, and whole human beings. So we're going to talk about each of these in turn. So from the moment of conception, or now I've started saying fertilization actually instead of conception, because the American College of OBGYNs has decided to change the definition of conception to mean when the embryo implants, not when the embryo is created. So from the moment of conception or fertilization, a distinct human being, a distinct person comes into existence. This human being is not a part of his or her mother. They're simply growing inside of their mother. So they have their own blood type. If it's a boy, they have their own gender. They have their own unique complement of DNA that is completely unique from the mothers and fathers, completely unique from any other human being that's ever existed. We all know this as physicians. We understand this is based in science. It is proven by scientific evidence. And the one other thing I'll say on this is that at the moment of fertilization, we do in fact have a distinct human being. There's no such thing as a fertilized egg. And I even hear people who are pro-life using that phrase. I would encourage you not to use that phrase. There is actually scientifically no such thing as a fertilized egg. At the moment of fertilization, the egg ceases to exist, the sperm ceases to exist, and you have a new living organism. That zygote is a completely distinct entity, not a fertilized egg. And again, this is proven by science. This is a quote from the author of one of my embryology textbooks in medical school, and Ward Kisher, who said this: every human embryologist in the world knows that the life of the new individual human being begins at fertilization. It is scientific fact. And there was recently, I think it was in 2018, a survey done through the University of Chicago that talked to biologists, many of whom were pro-choice, who believed in the right to abortion, but more than 95% of them agreed that a new human life begins at the moment of fertilization. So this really is undisputed within the scientific community. And not only is it a distinct human being, but it's a living human being as well. At the moment of fertilization, that new human being meets all the scientific criteria for a living organism. So they're responding to stimuli in their environment. They're metabolizing food for energy. All of the other criteria of a living organism, they meet at the moment of fertilization. And here's just some pictures. I know that we're physicians and we've all studied this, but even for me, I think it's always good to have this reminder. At just 5 weeks gestation, so just 3 weeks about after fertilization, that new human being has the beginning of a brain and spinal cord, has a beating heart, even though we can't quite see it yet on ultrasound. We won't be able to see it for about another week. And by 8 weeks, you can see how much growth there has happened, and that baby is directing that development from within. So now you can see limb buds, you can see eyes, you can see the beginning of the ears. Baby's already starting to move, and we'll start to be able to see that on ultrasound. And finally, that's a whole human being. So this is not obviously a mature human being at the moment of fertilization, but this new human being is complete, meaning at the moment of fertilization, he or she has everything they need to become the fully developed human being they will one day become. Nothing has to be added after that moment of fertilization. All that preborn child needs is time, support, and nutrition. The same thing that we all need, actually, to continue our development. Development doesn't end when we're born. It continues throughout our lives. So again, this is a whole human being, not a part of the woman's body. This is very different from an organ within the woman's body that just serves one function. This is a whole human being. And again, no outside forces are required for that embryo to become a fully developed human being. This is self-directed development. No pregnant woman has ever told her preborn child when it's time for her arms to start developing or her heart to start beating. It's all self-directed, and it's self-directed in a direction towards a functional, rational human being. So this is not the process of someone dying as their organs are starting to shut down and they're moving sort of away from that functional status. This is development towards functional status, which shows us that this is again, a whole human being, a living human being, and a distinct human being from his or her mother. All right. So what would be, because for the sake of time, I just picked one common objection to what are the unborn, that you hear a variation of this all the time. Okay. And I think, again, this question of what are the unborn is the essential question that we have to answer when we are discussing the issue of abortion. You have to get it back to this question because this really is what it's about. But it's the question that nobody who supports abortion really wants to answer. So one of the most common objection is, but the unborn or the embryo, the fetus, they don't look human, or it's just tissue, or it's microscopic. You can't even see it. How can it possibly be a human being? Okay, so some variation of this objection is extremely common. All right, so let's look at how we should answer that, or how we should think about that. The embryo doesn't look human. All right. So does this look human? To me, it really doesn't, but it is. It's a single-celled human zygote. So this is how all of us on this call, we're all from different countries. We all probably have different variations of skin color, hair color, all of that. We look very different now, but all of us, when we were conceived, when we first came into existence, we looked exactly like this. Okay, but this doesn't look human to me. What about this? Again, here we're at about 8 weeks gestation. Maybe starting to look a little bit more human, but still doesn't quite look human like we think of human beings. And again, at 8 weeks, many people are okay with women having abortions because they'll still claim that this is just a clump of cells or just some tissue. Pregnancy tissue is how many pro-abortion websites refer to this baby. All right. And how about this little cutie? Totally looks human. All right. And I don't think that there's anybody on the planet, hopefully, who would support ending the life of this child. All right. And what about this guy? My apologies to anyone who has tattoos. I'm not making fun of tattoos. This guy's obviously a human being, but he looks very different from the human being to his left, at least as I'm looking at my screen. Okay. But all of these represent different developmental stages of our journey as human beings. All right, I'm going to add one more picture. I don't know for any of you who are familiar with old US television, this is from a show called Howdy Doody that used to be very, very popular, but he sort of looks human, right? He's got a lot of human characteristics, but is he human? Well, obviously the answer is no. This is a puppet, so he's obviously not human. Why isn't he human though? He looks very human. Well, the question is not what a being looks like, but what it actually is. So we know that we are human beings based on who produced us, right? That two human beings produced us. The law of biogenesis states that like produces like. So the only thing that two human beings can produce is another human being. We are humans based on, again, our DNA complement, based on the species that we come from, based on actually what we are in our DNA and the nature that was given to us by God. And the world has a very long history, unfortunately, of defining entire classes of people out of existence simply because they don't look like us. So they take human beings and say they're not fully human or they're not persons because they don't look like us or they come from a different background. And obviously, there are multiple examples of this throughout history. None of them end well. It all leads to a tragedy, which is exactly what abortion has done. All right, so hopefully we're convinced now that abortion ends the life of an innocent human being. Again, that's its only intent. We're talking about elective abortion here. The only intent of an elective abortion is to end the life of an innocent human being. So let's move on to the next one, which again, hopefully you don't have to work so hard to convince people of. It is wrong to kill an innocent human being. All right, so is there something that sets human beings apart? Because I don't think any of us would say it's wrong to kill an ant or it's wrong to kill an animal for food. But why is it wrong to kill an innocent human being? Well, we have to look at what is it that makes us valuable as human beings, that sets us apart from other species on the planet. Now, I'm not saying that we should go out and intentionally kill all other species, but what is it that makes it so wrong to kill a human being? Are we valuable because of what we can do, our abilities, things like that? I've shown you different levels of abilities here in these pictures. Or are we valuable because of the kind of thing that we are? All right, so the question of when life begins, what we just talked about, is a scientific question. That is not a religious question. It is not a philosophical question. So when people try to say that you are only pro-life because of your religious views, that's a false statement. I am pro-life. Yes, we're going to talk about it. My religion informs that position, but I am pro-life because we're talking about a human being, and that is a scientific position. It has nothing to do with my religion, okay? So let's look now at the philosophical question of what makes humans valuable. So there's two different ways of viewing and valuing human beings. The first of these is the endowment view. This view is extremely inclusive and tolerant, something that those of us who are pro-life are accused of not being. It's inclusive and tolerant. And I just realized I'm going to have to start moving a little faster. This view says that every individual has inherent moral worth simply by the virtue of having a human nature. We all have our human nature in equal measure. Now, for those of us who are Christians, this view stems from the fact that we believe that we are created in the image of God. And so that's why we have inherent moral worth. But even someone who's not a Christian, I think, will acknowledge that all human beings are valuable and have worth. And if they truly believe in human equality, they'll believe in this endowment view. However, this clashes with another worldview, which is the performance view of human value. This says that our value is based on something that we can do. It says that not all human beings are persons, only some are. The problem is there's no agreement as to what standards determine who is worthy of life. So Peter Singer, who's a well-known bioethicist, he grounds the value of human beings and what makes someone a person in their ability to have conscious desires. So according to this, unborn children don't qualify as persons, but dogs would. And he even acknowledges that and says, yes, a dog would be more of a person than an unborn human being. What about someone who's unconscious? Would it be wrong? So if, say, a woman is unconscious or she's under anesthesia, would it be wrong to rape her? She has no ability to have conscious desires at the time, but of course it would be wrong to rape her. Why? Because she's a person, and that would be an extreme violation of her as a person. It doesn't matter whether or not she has the ability to have conscious thoughts or desires. So this view obviously destroys human equality. It says some people are persons, some people aren't. And if you're not, sorry, we can do whatever we want to you. All right, so if all humans have equal value, so if we're going on the endowment view, how are the unborn different from born humans then? Are there any other differences that would justify ending the life of an unborn child that would not justify killing you currently in your current state? Well, there are really only 4 differences between the human beings that we are now and the human beings that we were when we were in our mother's wombs. But none of them, I would hold, justify killing you at that earlier stage. All right, so in order to remember this, again, I like to make it easy. You're just going to remember the acronym SLED, S-L-E-D. All right, so the first one, S, stands for size. So people say, yes, but you know that unborn child is very, very small. The fetus is small. The embryo is microscopic. You can't see it. So they can't possibly be as valuable as born human beings. Well, how does size equal value? If we hold that to be true, again, we need our logic to be consistent. So if we hold that to be true, then anyone who's bigger than me would have the right then to kill me because I would have less value than they do. Of course, when you talk about it in that scenario where both of the human beings are born human beings, it makes no sense. It doesn't make sense applying it to preborn children either. The L stands for level of development. Okay, so they'll say, yes, but the preborn child, that fetus is very underdeveloped. We are very developed, so you can't kill us, but you should be able to end that life because of their lack of development. But again, let's just apply this out to its logical conclusion. A 4-year-old is much more developed than an infant. A 10-year-old is much more developed than a 4-year-old. So does that give the 10-year-old a right to end the 4-year-old's life? Absolutely not. Why? Because they're both human beings with inherent worth and value. All right. E stands for environment. So this is a big one, right? People will say, yes, but that fetus is inside of its mother. And so the mother should have the ultimate say in what happens because that's a different thing inside of the mother than when that child is outside of his or her mother. But how does where you are determine what you are? We can be in very different environments. In fact, we all are in very different environments right now, and yet who we are doesn't change. Our value as human beings doesn't change regardless of where we're at. You know, as Peter said, I used to live in Kenya. My environment where I was at in Kenya was very different than my environment here in the US in many ways. And yet I was exactly the same person because who I am as a human being, as a human person, doesn't change regardless of where I'm at. And finally, degree of dependency is the D. So people say, yes, but that fetus is completely dependent on his or her mother for survival. And so the mom should have the right to do anything she wants because that fetus is completely dependent on her. She didn't ask for that. That's a whole other conversation that we don't have time to have today. But, you know, basically it boils down to because that fetus, because that embryo is completely dependent on the mother, then the mother ultimately has the right to do what she wants. But why should dependency render a human being disposable? In fact, in most cultures, those who are dependent are actually valued a little more, right? We take extra care of them. Think about a dialysis patient. They are completely dependent on something outside of themselves, on dialysis, for their survival. So they are not fully independent, like this argument is going for supporting abortion. So would I have a right to walk into a dialysis unit and shoot and kill every single one of those dialysis patients if I was paying for their dialysis? So it was harming me in some way, harming me financially, for them to be completely dependent on dialysis. I still wouldn't have the right to go in and end their lives just because they were dependent. And the same applies to preborn children. And in fact, most societies, I think, recognize that parents have an extra responsibility to their dependents, extra responsibility that those of us who are strangers to those children do not have. This starts the moment that child comes into existence. So for any argument that people use to support abortion, I want you to trot out the toddler. Again, I'm not going to have time to go deep into this, but basically what it means is, for any argument they give you that justifies abortion, I want you to ask them if that same argument would apply to a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old. If not, then ask them why, because there are no morally significant differences. There really are no scientific differences as far as the essence of who we are between a 3-year-old and a preborn child. All right, so just like discriminating against people based on their race or their sex is wrong, discriminating against people based on their age, which is what abortion is also wrong. But in addition to sort of putting out this logic and reason and these scientific facts, we need to work really hard to make abortion unthinkable, because that's really the only way that we're going to end abortion. I think it's important to pass pro-life legislation. I think it's important to make abortion illegal, but we really need to make it unthinkable. And so in order to do that, people really need to understand the reality of what abortion is and what it does, both parties involved, both to the unborn child and to the mother. How do we do this? Well, I think part of it is people need to truly understand by seeing what abortion is. It's too easy for them to think of it as the sterile medical procedure, and they need to truly understand what it is. And this is not the only time that images or helping people see what something is, the reality of what something is, has been used. This is a picture from the Holocaust. I wasn't alive during the Holocaust, but I've been to the Holocaust Museum. I've seen pictures like this. That's really the only way I can truly understand the horror of what happened during the Holocaust, because a picture sometimes is worth 1,000 words. It sounds trite, but it really is true. And educators use images all the time, not to manipulate people, but to educate, to help them understand what's really happening. And so I do, on the next slide, want to show you the reality of what abortion does to our fetal patients. But before I do that, I want to acknowledge, with as many people as are watching this, I am sure that there is someone whose life has been touched by abortion, whether you yourself made an abortion decision, whether you participated in maybe talking someone into having an abortion, or maybe a family member. So I understand that there's a variety of emotions involved with this. If you don't think that you can handle seeing the next image, you're welcome to just turn your head away. But I also want you to know that I grieve with you if you are in that situation over the loss that you experienced. But again, I do think it's important for us to understand what's really going on. So this is what happens to our fetal patients during an abortion. And this is a very small child. You can see there's a small coin there next to that baby to show you the size of this baby. But this is what happens. These children are torn apart while they're alive, oftentimes while they can feel pain. This is not healthcare. This is not how human beings deserve to be treated. And it is not a sterile medical procedure. And again, even though all of us are physicians on this call, even though I'm an obstetrician, I deal with delivering even small babies like this all the time. It is still helpful for me to be reminded of the horror of what's happening during an abortion, both to that preborn child and to his or her mother, so that it just renews my passion that even though it's hard, even though we are totally countercultural on this, no matter where you're living, it's so important for us to be vocal in defending the rights of our patients. And it's the only way for us to help change hearts and minds about abortion, is for us to truly understand the horror of what's going on. So now I think I've got just maybe like 5 more minutes. So I'm going to go through just some common arguments for abortion just very quickly. Okay. So the first is that people will confuse objective claims with subjective claims. So they confuse a statement of fact versus a statement of opinion. So I'm sure many of you all have heard this one: don't like abortion, don't have one. Well, okay, this would be a subjective claim. Don't like jelly donuts, don't eat one. Okay, that's reasonable. You can tell someone that. You don't have to force your opinions about jelly donuts on somebody else. But would you ever say this to someone? Don't like abusing children? Okay, don't abuse one. No, of course we wouldn't say that. Why? Because it's okay for us to tell people not to abuse children because we recognize that that is wrong morally. That is a moral absolute. And even for people who say that they don't believe in moral absolutes, they actually do. And this would be a good scenario actually to bring up with them is, do you think abusing a child is wrong? Well, if you do, that's a moral absolute. So when you're dealing with a moral absolute, it is perfectly fine for us to tell someone that they can't do it. It's not just my opinion, okay? We can't make this statement when it comes to abortion because it's not just your opinion to say that rape is wrong or murder is wrong or abusing a child is wrong. These are moral absolutes that as a civilized society, we should be okay saying and we should be okay legislating. And I know I'm moving fast, so I apologize for that. The second is that they'll attack the person rather than refute the argument. So this is one that my male colleagues get all the time. You're a man, you don't have a uterus, you don't have a right to speak to this issue. However, arguments don't have genders. They rise or fall based on their merit, not based on who's making them, okay? And if they are attacking you rather than attacking your argument, you actually know that you're doing well because they know they can't attack your argument. All right, third, this again, very common. They assume the very thing that they need to prove. So they're begging the question, my body, my choice. What are they assuming here? They're assuming that that preborn child is just a part of the mother's body, not a separate human being. We've already talked about how you disprove this, okay? So again, pull out those scientific facts that that is in fact a completely separate human being. This fails on a second level, though, too. We all have limits to what we can do with our bodies. The autonomy that we have to our bodies stops the moment we use our bodies to harm another human being. And that's exactly what's happening in the issue of abortion. Fourth, they disguise their true position by hiding behind the hard cases, all right? Even though 99% of abortions are not done for these reasons, they will use these 2 reasons to try to justify abortion. So they'll say, what about the cases of rape or incest or life of the mother? And I'm going to go quickly through this because we're running out of time, but you guys are going to get a PDF of this, and so you can read through this. Basically, an abortion does not remove the trauma of a woman's rape. It only adds trauma. So it's not a treatment for her trauma. It compounds her trauma. And we need to remember that there are 2 victims when a woman becomes pregnant as a result of rape. Certainly the woman is the primary victim, but her unborn child is also a victim in that situation. All right, so what about if mother's health or life is in jeopardy? Well, these are actually 2 very different things. In law, health is often very loosely defined. It's not the same as life. It basically means anything that jeopardizes her health, and that could even be social concerns. But I would have you ask them, if they bring this up, ask them to tell you what conditions specifically they're referring to, because most times they won't be able to tell you that. But if the mother's life truly is in jeopardy, then we do the greatest good. We are pro-life in all circumstances, not just pro-life of the unborn. All right, so in addition to ending the life of an innocent human being, abortion is also the real war on women. You can see here the complications related to abortion. This is another hour to 2 hour long talk to go through this. I'm happy to do that at some point if you all would like that. But just know there are zero health benefits for elective abortion to women and a whole host of complications. Abortion is not healthcare. And as physicians, we should want to spare our patients from the grief that many of them feel for years over the loss of a child. We know that women go through this when they spontaneously lose their children. Why would we want to inflict this on a woman? That guilt is very complex as she goes through her life and can lead to many lifelong mental health complications. Abortion is not a fix to the problems that women seek it for. It is at the very best a temporary Band-Aid. Instead, what we need to do is fix the root causes of the problems. This is just a summary slide. Again, I know I'm moving really fast. I just want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. So also here are some helpful resources for you all. Our website at Apolog, we are a professional medical organization that represents pro-life medical professionals. We're not a religious organization, although I am a member of CMDA, but we exist to provide the medical evidence to support your pro-life argument. You can join as an international member. We're not just for U.S. physicians, and we have a midwifery subsection, a family medicine subsection. So we have all kinds of medical professionals that are a part of our organization. You can find a lot of really helpful evidence-based resources on our website and on the Charlotte Lozier Institute website. And then these are just 2 books that have really been formative for me in developing my my pro-life apologetics. So I will wrap up. Sorry about the quick wrap up at the end, and I'm going to stop sharing. And wow, there's a lot of sun coming in right now. I'm going to move my screen here. So that
Christina, just as you're moving your screen, thanks very much. We've been listening to Dr. Christina Francis from Apolog talking on the pro-life apologetics, and you got a huge amount of stuff in there in such a short time, and I know you could have said a lot more, and we're very grateful for the logical and dispassionate but compassionate way also in which you've handled this subject. Thanks very much, Christina, for really cutting to the chase on the key issue about the status of the baby in the womb, or indeed the status of the embryo, as well as the key foundation in this whole debate. Can I start just by asking you a question that we often get on this side of the Atlantic, which is okay, isn't the fetus an embryo really a potential human being rather than a human being? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, you're right.
Of course, the idea behind it is that if it's only a potential human being, then ending its life is not as serious.
Right, absolutely. Well, again, the question of whether or not we are human beings is a scientific one, and I don't know about you, Peter, or anybody who's watching this, but I've never in any scientific textbook, anything I've ever read about a potential human being. I mean, we either are a human being or we're something else, and so that's what I would say to people. I think what people are actually meaning is a potential person. And, again, then that gets into the whole, what determines our personhood, but we either are a human being or we're not. If we're not a human being, so if we're a potential human being, then what are we in that interim time? And when exactly do we become a human being? That's the other thing that no one can ever answer who has this objection is, then at what point do we become a human being? Is it when we're born? Well, that changes, right? So some babies are born, here in the US, there are some centers that babies can survive at about 21 and a half weeks now. So, previously that would be considered pre-viability, and maybe that person wouldn't have been considered a human being. So at what point do we become a human being then? And nobody can really point to that. And everybody sort of gives you different answers. And again, if this is a natural right, if our right to life is based on the fact that we are human beings with a human nature, then that can't be a moving line, and it can't depend on who you're talking about. Otherwise, there's no human equality. It has to be a defined moment in time. And what science tells us, again, is at that moment of fertilization, a new human being comes into existence. And I've often heard people say, we're not potential human beings at that point. We are human beings with potential. Yeah. And I think that's a great way of responding to that.
Yeah, I think that's great. Or saying this is a potential child or a potential adult, but it's a human being just like they are. Right. Often what we get is the language of Peter Singer. You alluded to him, that not all human beings are persons, but that some human beings are persons and therefore deserve greater respect. And of course, he would apply that at the other end of life as well, with right. dementia or terminal illness. How would you respond to that? What's a more correct view of personhood? What constitutes a person? Is it based on our attributes, or is it something else?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so the one sort of benefit of the doubt that I have to give to Peter Singer is he's at least consistent in his logic. So he's willing to apply it actually up until about the age of 1 or 2, I think, for children. And like you said, at the end of life as well. So he's at least consistent in his logic, which most people using this argument aren't. But, the problem is even Peter Singer can't tell you where it is that his position on personhood came from or what it is that informed that position. And so, how I would respond to someone who brings that up, first, I would say, if they're bringing that up, it's their responsibility to defend that position. So the first thing you should say to them is, tell me what it is that has informed your position on personhood. Where are you getting that? Because it's not, they made the statement, it's their job to defend it. Just like if we make a statement, it's our job to defend it. So that would be the first thing, is to push back a little bit, of course, respectfully, and ask them to tell you what they base that on. But then the other thing that I would say
often they would come back, they'd often come back, in my experience, on that and say, well, it has to do with rationality or consciousness or the capacity for communication, having relationships and that sort of thing. So how would you respond to that?
Sure. So I would respond to that by saying, okay, so if you're saying, so clarify with them, you're saying that the ability to have rational thought is what makes us a person. And they would say yes, if that's what they just said. Then I would say, okay, well, do you think that a 2-week-old newborn has the ability to have rational thought? Let them sort of think through that. Probably they're going to say no, because a 2-week-old newborn really can't have rational thought, and say, okay, well then if we take your line of reasoning then out to its logical conclusion, then a 2-week newborn is not a person. So does that mean it's okay to intentionally end their life? Probably they're going to say no. Okay. Or we can say, what about a person who's in a coma or under anesthesia for surgery? They don't currently have the ability to have rational thought. They'll say yes, but they will. Like as soon as they wake up, they'll be able to have rational thought. Well, the preborn child's no different. They have the potential to have rational thought. They're just not quite there yet. So that's what I would use, is sort of push back on and carry their statement out to its logical conclusion, which is, if that's applied to a born human being, then they're not going to be okay with it. And then again, it gets back to the question of what are the unborn and what are those essential differences between born and unborn?
Yes, and it's very helpful, these arguments from analogy you're using, to say, well, think about a 2-year-old. Would we kill them if they were small or disabled or had less capacity for communication or whatever? It really does help people to think about that. Often these arguments are tied up with, the idea that women, and particularly women who come from poor backgrounds or ethnic minority backgrounds, are themselves victims in the whole abortion debate and can be easily exploited, particularly by the medical profession or the dominant ethnic group or people who are wealthy and more powerful than that, and it can be quite a convincing argument in a way. But how would you respond to someone who said that abortion is just another example of men exploiting women, and particularly the pro-life position, where people are forcing people who don't have the resources to look after a baby for whatever reason to carry it to term and then therefore shoulder that burden more?
Right. Well, my first response to that, when we talk about men, and you're right, it is often that, these are just men that are trying to impose their will on women, is that abortion has actually enabled men to be completely irresponsible. Now, I don't hate men, so I'm not bashing all men that are on this call, but abortion has let men off the hook. It has made it so that they don't have to be responsible for the children that they helped create. And, we expect, at least here in this country, I don't know what laws in other countries are, but, here in this country, if a man fathers a child and then abandons the woman and leaves her to raise the child by herself, he has a financial responsibility. And in fact, he can be put in jail if he shirks that financial responsibility. So we recognize after birth that man, even if he doesn't want to be involved in that child's life, he has a responsibility to that child. Abortion has enabled men to get off the hook of having a responsibility. And it actually puts more of the responsibility on the woman. Her body is the one that's being violated during the abortion procedure. She's the one that's being subject to extreme complications of the abortion procedure and living with the mental health of that afterwards. We know that men also suffer mental health complications after abortion, after participating in an abortion decision, but women certainly shoulder the greater burden on that. And how it disincentivizes any of our societies from coming up with ways of how do we bring the family unit back together? How do we ensure that fathers are a part of their children's lives? We can't do that when there's an easy out of abortion. So that's the response to the question of, the pro-life position being men imposing their will on women. It's actually more empowering for women for abortion not to be an option. And that's why here in the US, if you look back at our original feminists, all of them were pro-life because they recognized that abortion was a violation of women and our primary responsibilities to our children. But in addition to that, when we talk about poor and minority women, the roots of abortion, certainly here in the US, but I think around the world as well, actually find themselves based in eugenics and population control. It is all about exterminating unwanted populations. And I think it is extremely racist and, I don't know what the word is for being prejudiced against people who are poor. I'm trying to come up with that word. I can't think of it. But, it's very prejudiced and biased against women who find themselves in difficult circumstances to say, you don't deserve support. You are not strong enough. You can't possibly do this. The only option for you is to end the life of your child. That is not at all empowering for women. In fact, it's extremely patriarchal, I think, especially for the medical community to say, you are not strong enough. You are not smart enough. You are not resourceful enough to take care of your children. Your only option, the only way that you're going to succeed in life is to end the life of your child. And our patients deserve so much better than that. When we talk about the maternal mortality issue, even just as one example, abortion does nothing to improve maternal mortality. In fact, in many cases, it makes it worse. But when you just have abortion as this Band-Aid to throw on something, I use the word Band-Aid. I just realized in an international crowd that probably doesn't go over as well. A plaster, right? I think that's the British term for it. So, when you just put that on it, saying that you're kind of fixing the situation, again, there's no incentive to get at the root causes of maternal mortality, which all of you know probably even better than me. Women need prenatal care. They need access to emergency surgical services. They need blood transfusions. These are the things that are going to fix maternal mortality, but nobody's incentivized to look into that and fix it when they can just throw abortion at it. And so that's another way in which abortion harms women, especially those that are most vulnerable.
Thank you. The question of how early comes up, on the basis of what you've said already, what would these same principles apply with embryo research, destruction of embryos? What about methods of contraception that act after fertilization but before implantation? What would be your response to that? And the reason I ask that question is that some countries distinguish between abortion and very early embryocidal activities. If you know what I mean.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's a really good question. And it's a tough one that I think even a lot of pro-life people kind of grapple with and have to try to figure out how they feel about it. But again, what is the one point in time that we can point to that a new human being comes into existence? It's the moment of fertilization. So that's well before the embryonic stage even, that's even when we've got that single-celled zygote, you have a new human being. And if our human nature, which is what our value and worth are based on, comes into full existence at that moment, then we have to say that even that single-celled zygote is the exact same as a 38-week fetus. That's a hard one to grapple with, I think, for a lot of people, because emotionally, we don't feel like we value those two human beings the same, right? And I get it. We would certainly grieve the loss of a 38-week, if a woman comes in with a 38-week stillbirth, that's going to feel very different than if she has a miscarriage, right after she realizes that she's pregnant. I get that. That's an emotional reaction. That's not a reaction based on reality, though. The reality is that a new human being comes into existence at that moment of fertilization. And so if that's the case, then if we are truly having a consistent pro-life ethic, we would have to be opposed to embryonic research, because that destroys a human being for research, which we wouldn't do to born human beings. And, finally, I know we're wrapping up the contraception question. It's a difficult one. I get it. There are lots of views on contraception. But I think for those forms of contraception that we know, based on the evidence, that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, have a post-fertilization effect, meaning you have a human being in existence and they intentionally prevent implantation, something like that, then I personally would consider that to be wrong. But I don't think that, just don't lead with that argument, I guess is what I would say. I would focus on elective abortions that we know are ending the lives of human beings. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And the very important point that the value of a human being does not depend on how much we might personally grieve for them. That's such a crucial point, but based on something altogether different. We're virtually out of time, but I just wanted to raise the issue finally of disability, and particularly severe or chromosomal disability. It's quite common in many countries, and in fact many countries allow abortion for disability on grounds of, for example, trisomy, Down syndrome, or Edwards or Patau syndrome, or spina bifida, and so on. How would you argue against that in a nutshell? What's the key point you would make?
Yeah. Well, so I think, again, in a nutshell, I would make two arguments. One would be that our value and our worth as human beings is not based on our ability levels. It's based on the fact that we're human beings. And we see examples all around us of born human beings with various ability levels, that it would not be okay for us to intentionally end their lives simply because they have a disability. I know in some countries, they're allowing that now, even for born human beings. But, we we all have different ability levels. I have different ability levels depending on how much sleep I've gotten, so we can't base our value and worth on our ability levels. But my second quick point would be that, and hopefully every physician who's on this call realizes this, that as physicians, we are human beings. We are not God, and we do not have infinite knowledge. And oftentimes our ability to make a diagnosis is actually limited. So I have a goddaughter actually who had a less than 5% chance of survival of the pregnancy. And she's now 9 years old. She has Down syndrome. She had to have some corrective heart surgeries, but she's the joy of her family's life. And the diagnosis that she received was that she wouldn't survive her pregnancy. So oftentimes we're wrong. Oftentimes, if we actually focus treatment efforts, children with trisomy 18 now are sometimes able to live into their teens. So, and that used to be considered uniformly lethal. So that would be my argument in a nutshell, is that our value and worth as a human being isn't based on our value. And sometimes we as physicians are wrong.
Thanks so much, Christina. We've been listening to Dr. Christina Francis speaking on pro-life apologetics, and it's been a very comprehensive and clear presentation. Thank you for the way you've answered the questions as well. And we're all conscious, I think, that we're only just scraping the surface of this, and we could spend many hours talking about many other aspects of pro-life apologetics. But I hope you've found this has been a very useful introduction and helped to highlight what the real key questions are in wanting to defend it. So, Dr. Christina, thanks again for your time and expertise today. And thank you to all of you for joining us today on ICMDA webinars. We hope we'll see you again soon. May God bless you. Thank you.